Good morning, I'm doing everyone. Hope you're having a good day. I'm having a good day. Cloudy, heading towards rain, but a cup of tea, good way to start off the day. So in our series in Gideon, we're coming to one of those passages that is very challenging for some people. It's one of those challenges where a lot of people die. In fact, they're killed. It's one of those passages where God actually instructs somebody to kill a whole group of people. And some people really struggle with that. And I understand why. It feels like there's a big disconnect between the God that we understand in the New Testament and the God from the Old Testament. I want you to know that there are not two gods, obviously, nor did God have some kind of a reformation in his own life that changed the way he did things between the Old and New Testament. Before we look at this bloody passage, I want us to look at three verses that remind us in the Old Testament, well, one's in the New Testament, two are in the Old Testament, that remind us about what the true heart of God is in all of this. So let's start off with that. The very first verse is going to be in Exodus chapter 34. This is where God and Moses are meeting, and God is explaining who he is. And he says, and he passed in front of Moses, and he was proclaiming to Moses, the the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands and forgiving the wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children and their children for the sin of their parents to the third and fourth generations. There's a comparison here. I think I might have lopped off one of the verses, but there's a comparison here to God showing his grace and love and forgiveness to thousands of generations versus upwards to five generations of how a sinful pattern will carry on. It's not that God is angry for five generations of people, it's the sin will continue on for five generations. I don't want to get too deep of a dive into this, but we actually see this in everyday life. And if you've ever raised children, you know that it's easier to hand off your bad qualities than it is to hand off your good qualities to your kids. It's just the way it goes. But this is the heart of God. He's wanting to forgive. He's wanting to show love and faithfulness. He wants to bring people back to him, and he wants this to happen, all this grace for thousands of generations. Now, Ezekiel 33:11. Say to them, as surely, I don't have time to put these verses in context, I'm sorry, but say to them, as surely as I live, declares the Lord, I take no pleasure in the death of the wicked. So whenever we're looking at one of these passages in the Old Testament that seems rather bloody, that seems rather harsh, you have to know that the Lord didn't take any pleasure in that. But look what it says, but rather that they turn from their ways and live. Turn, turn from your evil ways. That is the heart of the Lord. He's not like some cosmic killjoy sitting up there and just waiting to zap people and beat them over the head and all that. No, he's longing for people to turn to him. Second Peter 3:9 kind of is right along this same line of thinking. The Lord is not slow in keeping his promises, as some understand slowness. Instead, he's patient with you. This is in relation to the second coming of the Lord, and to their eyes, just relative few years after Jesus, they're already wondering what's taking so long. So he's saying, well, God's not slow in keeping his promises, as some understand slowness. This is what he's doing. Instead, he's patient with you, not wanting anyone to perish. He doesn't want people to die, but he wants everyone to come to repentance. Remember all that as we step into our story today. If you remember where we left off, 135,000 troops of a foreign nation had entered Israel, but God had raised up a man named Gideon to free them. He had gotten Gideon to reduce his army to 300 men, and then by God's might, they defeated this army, and the army's on the run, and Gideon is now chasing this army. because he's been told to kill all of them. Remember the context in which this takes place of who God actually is, okay? Gideon and his 300 men, exhausted yet keeping up the pursuit, came to the Jordan and crossed it. And he said to the men of Succoth, Give me, give my troops some bread. They're worn out, and I'm still pursuing Zebah and oh, I hate all these names in the Old Testament. The kings of Midian. So this is the Midianites were the people that had um, occupied Israel for a number of years. Gideon's now chasing the last of the troops and their two kings. This is happening in a Midianite town. He asked for some bread, but the officials said, do you already have the hands of these two guys in your possession? Why should we give bread to your troops? Then Gideon said, just for that, when the Lord has given these two guys into my hand, I will tear your flesh with desert thorns and briars. Oh my goodness. This is like so far from Christian grace. This is about as far from Christian grace as it gets. And from there, he went up to another town and made the same request, but they answered the same as the last guys did. And he said to these guys, when I return in triumph, I will tear down this tower. So Gideon, son of Joash, then returned from the battle. He called a young man from the one town and questioned him. The young man wrote down the names of the 77 officials or elders of the town. Gideon came back and he did just as he said. He took the elders, verse 16 down here. He took the elders of the town and taught the men from this town a lesson by punishing them with desert thorns and briars. He also pulled down the tower in the other town and killed the men of that town. And then he said to the inhabitants of these towns, or to these two kings, what kind of men did you kill at Tabor? Men like you, they answered. This is the two kings. Each one of them, each one with the bearing of a prince. And Gideon replied that those were my brothers, the sons of my mother. As surely as the Lord lives, if you had spared their lives, I would not kill you. Turning to his oldest son, he says, kill them. But the oldest son did not draw his sword because he was only a boy and was afraid. So these two kings, they taunt Gideon, come do it yourself. As is the man, so is his strength. I don't know if they actually thought that Gideon would follow through at this point or not, but he does. So Gideon stepped forward and killed both of them and took the ornaments off the camels' necks. Wow. What are you going to do with that? All that? It's a bloody mess. Literally. I mean, he's killed 135,000 troops. He threatens the elders and the townspeople from two different towns. He finally catches up with the two kings that are on the run, and he kills them by his own hands. And I don't know in detail if this is all that God, like the way God wanted him to do it, because God never said use thistles and thorns and briars and kind of torture the elders. I don't know that he said that, but he did tell Gideon, you're going to have to go up and wipe these guys out completely. So what do we do with that? Well, we come back to the verses that we looked at the beginning. Verses like uh, Exodus 34, that the Lord is a compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in loving or in love and faithfulness, forgiving those who turn from their sin. We remember that he's the same God of Ezekiel 33:11. He doesn't take any pleasure in the death of these people. He would rather they turn from their sins and turn to him. These people stubbornly rejected God. And it's not as if they didn't know who God was. A lot of these people were descendants of Abraham also. When you follow the storyline from Genesis on, you'll find that a lot of these people are all related back through Abraham. They had the same truth about the same God from Abraham. For generations, they chose to reject that truth. God continually would have been reaching out to them, wanting them to turn from their sins, and they stubbornly refused. So at the end of the day, for me, I don't blame God. I don't actually blame anybody, but I do understand that the what happened here today is a result of their stubborn refusal to believe in the gracious God who would have forgiven them and allowed them to live if they had turned to him, if they had only turned to him. Because at the end of the day, the Lord is patient, not wanting anyone to perish, but everyone to come to repentance. Anyway, interesting story. That's how I deal with it as I look at this story myself. Lord willing, on Wednesday, we'll look at another story that's actually a bit sad on Gideon's side of things. It's amazing how honest the Bible is about all the characters that it covers. But anyway, between now and then, I hope you have a good couple of days. I look forward to seeing you on Wednesday.